Eversense 365 is an implantable continuous glucose monitor that lasts 1 full year. Not only does it last double the time as its predecessor, but it requires less calibrations, just 1 a week, among other improvements. But what about looping? Will this sensor connect to an insulin pump to automate insulin delivery? It's clear to do so. Could the open source community use the Eversense for their needs? Apparently that's happening. And could the device one day shed its outer transmitter? Today, you'll hear that that's in the works. Welcome to Diabetic. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and management with physicians, tech leaders, and those thriving with diabetes and using the tech themselves. This podcast comes out every Monday on YouTube and all major podcast platforms, and I've got videos dropping every day across my social media and on Fridays on YouTube. For those that are new, Eversense is a sensor about the size of 2 stacked Tic Tacs. It gets placed just under the skin through a short, simple procedure. There's an outer transmitter that powers the implant and sends glucose readings to a smartphone. The transmitter easily comes on and off at the user's discretion, but when you take that off, you won't have readings, and when you put it back on, you don't get retroactive readings either. I spoke with Senseonics CEO Tim Goodnow and Asencia's president of CGM, Brian Hansen, about where Eversense is now, and we got a deep dive into the future of the device. If you want to hear directly from an Eversense user themselves, I spoke with Paul Reed about his experience using the CGM, and I've thrown a link to that in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date on all the Diabetic Tech content and the news in diabetes tech, make sure you sign up for our bi-monthly newsletter, the Diabetic Roundup. I've got a link to that in the show notes. And also, if you want to connect with other diabeticies like yourself, we've got a Diabetic community Discord where you can talk about just about any piece of diabetes technology. We've got different chat rooms for everything. Links to that are also in the show notes. Both of those are free. Keep in mind that anything you hear on this podcast or on any of my pages, social media or YouTube, are not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. Always consult with a physician before making changes to your healthcare. Brian and Tim, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to talk to you about all the new stuff that's come to the Eversense CGM. Before we get into all of that though, can you kind of just explain to my listeners what makes the Eversense CGM different than the CGMs we see worn on the external side?
Sure. So, Justin, thanks for spending the time with us. We appreciate it. I'm Tim Goodnow. I've had the opportunity to work with Eversense for a number of years now. We've been working on the technology, and we've been focused on a couple of things. Obviously, now with the 1-year duration, that's the biggest difference, of course. And the objective behind the long-term sensor is just as you'd imagine, to try to make it a little bit easier so there's one less thing you need to worry about and manage your diabetes devices. But in addition to that, of course, with the long-term sensor is it's fully implanted, so it's under the skin. And that gives some more flexibility in the way that you manage your life, things like showering and swimming and so forth, as well as less needs to do the sensor insertion. So those are the biggest elements.
And so this is testing the interstitial fluid, right? How is it? Because when you look at other CGMs, they have this little sensor that's this little tiny hair strand rod. This looks a bit different. Can you kind of tell us about the technology going behind that?
Sure. So the placement, you're right, is exactly the same. We're in about the same depth beneath the skin. So it is in the interstitial fluid, right? The fatty tissue is where it sits. We all get our glucose from the same place. The technology is different because all of the other technologies, or most of the other technologies, certainly the most common ones, are all an enzyme. They chew up glucose and they give off electrons, right? And that's the same whether you're talking about a transcutaneous CGM or frankly the strips and meters that you measure, the finger stick testing with. So we've taken a different approach because for the long-term in-body viability, you need something that's more stable than a protein. Proteins are actually meant to break down in your body over time and new ones are replaced. And of course, you can't have that going on if you're using a protein or an enzyme to measure glucose in a constrained sensing environment. And that's one of the reasons why the other sensors are, 7, 10, 14, 15 days. We came up with this technology that's called abiotic. So that means it's synthetic, right? It's not a natural product, and therefore will last for a long, long time in the body. So it's a glucose recognition technology that gives off light instead of giving off electrons. And we measure that light to tell how much glucose is there.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about the process of getting it implanted. What is that procedure like?
Sure, it's pretty straightforward. It is a procedure that you do go to the doctor's office, although we do have nurses that will actually come to your house and do it as well. So it's actually quite straightforward. There is a site preparation that occurs. In other words, you got to clean the area because you are going to breach the skin. There's a small amount of lidocaine that's given. That's actually what you feel. Of course, you don't feel the incision at all. You feel an injection. The lidocaine pretty much immediately numbs the area. It takes about 1 minute. So in that process, you're completely deadened to any pain. And then the nurse or the doctor will do a small nick incision about 4 or 5 millimeters in width. And then we have a delivery device that places the sensor in parallel just under the skin, so down 4, 5, 6 millimeters, parallel to the skin surface, almost always in the axis between the shoulder and the elbow, and then it's closed up with steri strips, right? So pretty straightforward. The average insertion takes about 2.5 minutes, and then now a year later, when you come back to have it taken it out, it takes about 4 minutes to do the procedure, all in the doctor's office or in some cases in your home.
How long has this sensor been around, and how has it evolved over that time period?
It's actually been around for some time period. We are coming up on maybe 8 years that we've been on market, maybe 9 years that we've been on market. First, we started with a 90-day version of the product. So as we stabilized it, we had good biostability. Our first generation product was 90 days. After a few years, which included some delays with COVID regulatory approval, we then went to the 180-day version of the product. And then we're now on the 365-day version of it. So in that entire time period, the sensor has remained pretty consistent, but we have been upgrading the integrity or the stability of the chemistry, which is basically contact lens material that sits on the surface of the sensor, so that it will last that full 365 days.
How many users are currently using an Eversense?
There's about 6,000 people today that are using Eversense, and obviously Brian is working real hard to increase that number and doing a great job.
Yeah, and have you found that with each layer, like adding more days, that there's a larger influx of newcomers?
Sure. The big negative of Eversense, of course, is doing that insertion, right? That's the one consideration that you need to make. But when you make that decision, now today, as an example, you don't think about your sensor for 364 more days, right? It literally is invisible to you. As a user, you don't interact with it. You don't touch it. You don't do an insertion. You just go on a sensor holiday for 364 days. So as we've extended it and moved that time period from that 90-day sensor vacation to 180-day, now 365 days, absolutely, it does become more likable, more interesting, and more people are moving to it.
What about the changes in calibrations? I know that calibrations were needed every day with the last sensor. How has that changed here?
Yeah, so we talked about the chemistry change for stabilization in the body. The other big thing we were working on is to essentially give us more optics so we could look at different wavelengths of the spectral signal that was created over time. In the first generation, we only had one LED and 2 photodiodes. Well, we've now taken that up to 8 LEDs and 16 photodiodes. So a significant improvement with no size increase. So that was a key design element, right? So it stayed in the exact same shape, length, width, and dimension. But that has now given us an ability to look in different places, if you will. So we can now monitor what's called the oxidation of the chemistry as it goes on. So we can absolutely, with the algorithm, separate that out from what's glucose and what is any environmental chemistry change that may go on. So a lot of technology. On that side, it's more around the electronics and the optical characteristics and the physics, quite frankly, of that light measurement.
Wow, so cool. I didn't realize there was so much change within the sensor. What challenges existed trying to extend this by, double the amount of time?
Yeah, so the big one is just the body, as you can imagine, is a pretty highly protected place, right? Anything that it recognizes as foreign, it's going to work to get rid of, right? And that's always been the case. The challenges for any of us, when you go, remember the first CGMs were 3 days, and 5 and 7 and 10. It's always been the same issues, that body response. The body is trying to do two things. One, it doesn't want anything foreign in there if it recognizes it foreign, and it's going to try to break it down. And two, if it's a transcutaneous sensor, it's also got an open wound, and it's going to try to close that up, right? So you're fighting that biological process with any of the CGMs, no matter what their length is. So what we've been working on is making the sensor as invisible as possible to the body, right? So as I said, one of the things we've done is the surface, quite frankly, is a contact lens material, right? Very inert. They're very biostable. You can see through them, right? So they have great optical characteristics. And the trick we've been doing now for the past decade is trying to make the surface of that sensor look as much like water as we can. Because what do you know is biostable and biosuccessful? Water in the body, right? So that's what we've been working on in simple terms.
Okay. So there's no change in size to the sensor. Has the transmitter, the piece that's worn on the outside in order to capture these measurements, has there been any change in the size or shape of that, or the internals?
There certainly have been changes to the internals. We've been working on things. One of the things, of course, you want is you're always fighting. You want a whole bunch of battery capacity, right? So it lasts longer, but you also want to take the size down, right? So the smallest on-body that you can. We've certainly been working on that. We've changed the USB connection that we have. Now it's a little bit more standard. So that's a little bit easier. There's one less thing that you need to pack when you travel. So those changes have been going on. In all honesty, we are, now that we have the 365-day product, we are now exclusively focused on completely eliminating the transmitter. Yes, we could make it smaller, but frankly, we're going to put our resources into getting rid of that transmitter. And it does two things today. It powers it and it talks by Bluetooth. So that powering is now going to go inside the sensor, and the Bluetooth's now going to go inside the sensor. So I don't think that it makes sense for us to fight to take the transmitter size down, because in the same amount of development time period, we're going to eliminate it.
Wow. Okay. Real quick. So was the prior version, did that have a proprietary charger? And you're saying that the new one now is USB-C, which everyone has?
It did. It had a cradle that it set in.
Okay.
Patched and paired with it. So it was one more, and then that connected to a USB-C. So now we've gotten rid of the cable. So the USB-C goes right, water safe USB-C goes right to the transmitter. So you don't have to remember to carry that cradle.
Okay, fantastic. So currently the sensor requires the transmitter in order to be powered and capture those numbers. And this means that if you take the transmitter off for, say, 20 minutes, you won't get readings for 20 minutes. And then when you put the transmitter back on, you won't have retroactive readings, correct?
In the current configuration, because of that powering, just as you said, the way that it's powered is through near field energy. So it's just like your Apple Pay or Google Pay, right? When you co-locate those, you get the energy transfer back and forth. If you take that transmitter away, you don't have the energy transfer. So the LED doesn't flash and it will sit there dormant. So
when it comes to the environment, the impact on the environment, does Eversense, does it stand ahead of the others? It feels like it would, because we're not throwing away so much, or at least when it comes to all the pieces your users are working with.
That's certainly one of the objectives that we've been focused on, right? Overall, you know better than I do, right? If you can take some of that headache away of thinking about my diabetes, right? People are going to reward you with their purchase. And that's what we're focused on. And certainly what we've been able to do with the powering, as well as there's no insertion device, right? And that's the biggest component that people have to carry with them. The only thing that we do suggest that you carry with you is we have a very small sleeve of double-sided adhesive, because our transmitter is actually designed to come off every day, right? Because you can take it on and off. We suggest that you take it off, you put a fresh, brand new adhesive on, right? So the biocompatibility of that adhesive is much, much better. Clean the area when you're in the shower, right? And then when you get back out, you put that brand new adhesive on. First, you stick it to the backside of the transmitter, and you slap it up on top of the sensor, and you're good to go. So all you would need to carry with you is, if you went away from a weekend, is 3 adhesives that are just about the thickness of cellophane tape, right? So real small, real easy to move with you.
This episode is sponsored by Omnipod. So far this year, I've taken about 15 flights, so I know a thing or two when it comes to packing for type 1 diabetes. One thing I love about Omnipod 5 is that all the supplies come in one small, convenient package. No additional packages to remember for tubing or infusion sets, which helps me travel with confidence and ease. See if you're eligible for a 10-day trial by visiting omnipod.com/diabetic. On there, you'll see full safety and risk information and trial terms. Again, that's omnipod.com/diabetic. I've had some users message me before with images of scars that they've had left from the Eversense. What have you heard from users about their experience with markings left over, and how have you worked to kind of soften that, I guess?
Yeah, so the scar, quite frankly, almost always heals with time, right? As we went from 90 to 180 and now to 365, it's a tiny nick incision like you might get a scratch anywhere. Early on, you are going to see it, right? But after, certainly after a month, in the shortest case, sometimes a couple of months in the longest case, that's going to fully heal and resolve. So we actually do hear about it from some new users early on, but actually as they see it change over time, they get a lot more comfortable with it. So it is one of the considerations, but frankly, it almost always goes away. And we expect it with a 1-year product, you're not going to be impacted by that at all.
Are there any areas of Eversense that you've improved based off of user feedback?
Oh, sure. I mean, obviously, the number one thing is, as we were coming out, right, with the 180-day product, the rest of the market had moved to no calibration. So you had to address that, right? The other thing that was clear, even today, if you ask people what their number one need is for a CGM, it's accuracy, especially in the hypoglycemia reason, right? So we've focused a lot, and I've always been very, very true to the analytical accuracy, and not at all compromised on the ability, which is where the ultimately ICGM designation comes from, but also the ability to correctly and proactively warn that hypoglycemia is coming. As you know yourself, the last thing you want to do is be pissed off in the middle of the night and be woken up by a false hypo, right? So we worked really hard on that as well. The user interface on the phone takes a lot of work, right? You want to be current there. We've got a good app, but we're always going to be continue investing in that as well. And as we said, a lot of those elements, the architecture that we put into the sensor, are really to get us to the next generation as well. So absolutely, all the time. In fact, not so much in the US, but the regulatory bodies, when they come in and we do an annual approval to stay in business for our quality systems, one of the things they absolutely look at is they say, let me see all your customer input, and then show me how that customer input all traces, and show me the design specifications that says you're meeting those requirements. So it's a big part of what we do in design and development.
So ICGM designation, the sensor has it. It has clearance to work with insulin pumps. It's been 6 months. You received ICGM designation in April 2024. Is this sensor ready to automate insulin?
Absolutely, and you may be familiar, we've actually already done patient testing with Beta Bionics, right? So in some of their pre-release, there's actually clinical literature that shows that it works great. It's a big area of focus for us, and since we have on the call with us one of the leaders in insulin pumps, maybe I'll let him speak to it because he's actually helping us quite a bit as we work with the pump manufacturers right now for integration.
Yeah, Justin, I'd say there's three things that came with iCGM. One is it demonstrated that our product not only hit that high bar, but exceeded that high bar to get the iCGM designation. So we were very proud of that. And that comes with, as Tim talked about, the tremendous performance of the product. The second piece is it allowed us to now submit future products to the FDA, like the 365 submission on a 510K pathway, which is much faster than a traditional PMA, a longer process. So the iCGM clears a faster path through the FDA. And then thirdly, as you said, it allows us now to have meaningful conversations with the pump companies. And those conversations are ongoing. A couple really well, a couple kind of still questioning to see if the volume will be there to justify the resources necessary to invest in the pairing. Just because there's an ICM doesn't mean that it automatically connects. There's some engineering work that has to happen between both companies behind the scenes, and that takes time, right? It took time in my prior life. It'll certainly take time for us as we work with companies. But a few of those discussions and a few of those activities, as Tim said, are ongoing now, and I'm certainly hoping to coax a few more to jump on the train, because as we see this inflection of interest with 365, we hope we become more valuable as a partner to a pump company, and they want to offer choice to their patients, which is really our goal at the end of the day. Offer choice to all of them, let that patient make the decision on which CGM they would best like to be paired with their insulin pump.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, while there are so many reasons someone could use an Eversense today in so many different situations, whether they're on MDI, they're not on insulin, but they still need CGM readings. You know, there's lots of use cases for it, but there's also a large market, including myself, who would love to use this CGM with an insulin pump, because then you get all of that convenience of the CGM with the convenience of automated insulin, which is a huge mental break from my diabetes, right? So being able to pair that up is amazing. Do you think, you know, you said Beta Bionics already has done some preliminary studies with this. Are they kind of the ones who are leading the effort a little bit? I will say they have taken in other CGMs quite quickly. They've been around for what, a year? They already have G6, G7, Libre 2 Plus, Libre 3 Plus. They are leading the way in adoption. Do you think that they will be your first partner, or are they the ones like kind of pushing forward the most?
Well, we haven't announced yet because, as you can imagine, there's business. As Brian said, we are actively working with some of the pump manufacturing companies. As we shared, we do have a history with Beta Bionics. You know, that's a great company. They're small and innovative and really doing things, you know, different. So although we can't and haven't spoken about it out loud yet, it's important for us to work with the leading manufacturing pump companies, the innovative ones, frankly, as Brian said, all of them. And we will be there. We have active development work going on right now, and we'll announce it, you know, probably in the next quarter or so.
Justin, I just want to jump in and say something kind of funny here. That's how I know Tim so well, because of my 8 years at Tandem. Tim and I met over and over again about the integration possibilities with the Tandem product and the Senseonics product. I was the one that kept telling him, no, you need to get to a 1-year sensor. You need to get to where there's some volume behind it. We have a lot of resources, you know, associated with connecting with a Dexcom, ultimately with an Abbott. We want to do Senseonics. We just need to get there first. So it's ironic now we're here. I'm on the other side of it after saying, hey, hold off. Let's get to the 1 year. Now we're at the 1 year, and it's really allowing us with the iCGM designation to have a different level of conversation, as you can imagine, because without the iCGM, there's no pairing, right? There's just too much to do to get there. It's a full-blown clinical trial between the two products. So the iCGM designation was absolutely important to have to now further those conversations.
What impact on adoption rate for your CGM do you think that would have, having one pump partner?
Yeah, it would be nice to have 2 or 3 or 4 pump partners, but we'll start with one and you know, slide into 2 or 3. Yeah. Obviously, we get into some accounts, especially in the endocrinology side, that really believe that they only work with patients that wear pumps. We know pump penetration is still well less than 50%, so there's plenty of type 1 seeing endocrinology out there that aren't on a pump today. They might not even fully be on CGM technology today. But there is a perception that we need to have a pump connected so that some of those folks will begin to prescribe our product at a higher level to give the patients that option. At least with ours being in for only a year, if you made that decision a year later, you certainly can pivot. Hopefully by then we have, a pump partner lined up. That's certainly the goal and the plan. But I think there's more perception than reality there, but it would certainly help our uptake. And listen, I've got 45 reps out in the field along with some clinical folks in the United States that would love to go out and represent a pump when they're talking about our sensor as well. So we would be a valuable partner, in my opinion, to any pump company. But going back to what I said earlier, let's offer choice. If a patient gets choice, they make a better decision. And if ours is part of that choice, then it just adds to the portfolio that they get to choose from. And that's certainly what I think we've always been about.
Is this sensor currently only available in the US?
No, we have it in some European countries as well.
Okay.
Two of the larger ones in Germany and Italy, a couple of the smaller ones. We have an office. The Asencia office is actually out of Basel, Switzerland. So we have a team over there that's selling a lot of BGM product, and then they also represent the CGM product in select countries. We hope to be able to launch the 365 product over there in the calendar year, probably middle year of 25. And then with some success, I hope to expand that to some additional European countries that would benefit from it.
When it comes to implementing a new CGM into a pump, how much work goes into that? Because a number's a number, right? This CGM gives you a number every 5 minutes. This CGM gives you a number every 5 minutes. Why can't a pump company just say, okay, we're taking these numbers? It's not that easy?
Well, and the iCGM gives you certainly the opportunity to do that, the regulatory approval process. From a pump integration, though, each one of those systems is a little bit different, as you know, and it's a little bit different requirements, and a little bit different information comes over with each one of those data streams. So, for example, if, one can give an alarm that says, hey, I don't have glucose right now, right? And therefore you need to consider that in your dosing algorithm. Another one may give a completely different type of alarm. So all of those data streams need to be translated and interpreted and included inside of the design and development. And even though we as manufacturers don't have the requirement to submit that prospectively to the agency, to the Food and Drug, and have them approve it prospectively under the iCGM, we still have to do all of that work. We're still subject to them coming in and auditing us. So they'll come in and say, show us your design and development that you did on integration with Pump X or Pump Y. Show us that it's valid, right? So we're still doing all the work, and that's what's going on behind the scenes.
Do you think, are we missing a standardized way of connecting this and that? It doesn't sound that simple. Is there room for a standardized way of connecting a CGM to a pump?
And I think a lot of that has happened. But as you have just minor differences in them, let's say, you get an alarm, CGM sends an alarm and says, hey, my sensor is 14-day sensor. It's going to expire in 24 hours. Well, the Eversense is 365 days. And it's just all those minor differences that all add up that, yes, it can be standard, but then the pump or the algorithm is got to interpret some of that. One of the things, as you know, that is experience that we're proud of because we don't have it is the transcutaneous sensors have a nighttime dropout, right? You roll over, you put compression on the transmitter, and you get an artificially low glucose for a while. Well, the algorithm needs to know that, right? Needs to anticipate it, needs to not get you in trouble by turning your insulin delivery off. And different technologies have different considerations they use for that. So it is standard that it's Bluetooth and we use it, but then there's 1,000 little differences, right, that make up each individual product.
Wow, that's fascinating. When it comes to the US, health insurance is, pretty much the way to go here if you have access. How easy or difficult is it for someone who wants Eversense to get it with their health insurance companies? Are health insurance companies accepting to your product, or are they very difficult to work with?
It's gotten much better over time, and I inherited a very good situation. We have broad coverage by commercial insurance, and we also have coverage by Medicare. So those two are getting well over 300 million covered lives, and it rarely is an issue as it relates to coverage. Then the insertion is another piece that we have to ensure is covered, and Medicare bundles that together. The insurance companies, commercial insurance companies, see that as two separate pieces. But today there is a daily code for CGM. Ours fits perfectly into that. So from a coverage perspective, we see very little challenges with that today.
Okay. And when it comes to cost for the patient, let's say you have a patient, they have pretty good health insurance, maybe a gold, a platinum, which is on the higher levels of health insurances. They currently pay $70 for a 3-month supply of Dexcoms. So they're paying $280 a year for a CGM worn externally. How is cost on your end for a patient with good health insurance?
Yeah, it matches up nicely with ours. And if it were to match up nicely with ours, we do have a patient assistance program that allows those that need some financial assistance to drive down their price, right? So for the 6-month sensor, it was $99. For the 1-year sensor, it's $199. So from what you just said, it's very, very similar to the 90-day shipments that someone would get today. So cost, provided you have commercial insurance or you have Medicare, should not be a reason why you wouldn't choose the Eversense product. We have broad adoption, and the costs are very similar with our patient assistance program, which is available to everybody, by the way. You don't have to qualify for it. Anybody can access that program.
When you say anyone, does that mean people without insurance?
It really is. If you have insurance and there's some, a delta there in the assistance that is needed, that's what it is for. It is not for someone who has no insurance. So we're not subsidizing someone without insurance. We do not have Medicaid coverage, but like I said, Medicare, and for those that have commercial insurance, we have a program. Again, for the commercial insurance, we have a patient assistance program.
Okay. If someone doesn't have health insurance and they're currently paying out of pocket for CGMs now that are non-Eversense, would the price be similar still to your product, or is there any incentive, since yours has one procedure, one transmitter, some adhesive patches? Would it be cheaper to use your product than, say, buying 3 external applicators every month, full price at $100 a sensor, $300 a month, $3,500 a year?
It's a good question, and I'd say it roughly comes out the same. So we do have some patients that choose to elect a cash procedure simply because they don't have insurance to cover it. It roughly comes out to about the same amount because of the daily allowance and kind of how that's calculated over 365 days. Maybe the only difference, Justin, would be ours would be a one-time payment that would cover a year versus someone who would pay 4 times a year for a 90-day shipment of the other traditional CGMs. But once you netted it out over the full year, it's roughly the same cash price that we would charge for the product.
Okay. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the DIY community, the open source community that has found ways to use their glucose data in incredible ways, including this device that's on screen with me right now. It's a sugar pixel. It shows my glucose readings on this little display. It has alarms. It's fantastic. I like using it on my set so I can see my glucose readings. First of all, what are your thoughts on the DIY community and what they've done so far?
First of all, the strategy that we follow with DIY is the data is yours, right? It doesn't belong to the company. It doesn't belong actually to your health insurer. We're happy to share it where you think it's appropriate, but first and foremost, the data is yours. So if you want to be able to use it and use our product safely with it, we'd absolutely like to see that happen. And today there are loopers that are looping with Eversense, right? And they're getting the value out of it because they've figured out, as you said, in some cases, literally when we send, the glucose alert that might go to a phone when we send it or might go to some other folks, they're actually intercepting that and picking it up, right? And using that and the rate arrow to do their adjustments with. So fully supportive. It's a great team. They've worked very well with the regulatory bodies, even though they're not regulated. And a lot of feedback, right? And in fact, there's one of the new pump manufacturers that's now using that algorithm, right? Because it works so well. So we're fully supportive of it where we can. We're going to continue to do it, right? And allow people that want to have that personal level of diabetes control right at their fingertips, have at it.
Does it currently require internet access to intercept these readings, or is it possible for people to intercept locally, say if they're on a plane, and use that data?
It's all Bluetooth, right? Bluetooth to the phone. Now, you need to have the Wi-Fi or cellular to sync with the cloud, but in real time, you're going to get, all of the calculations are done inside the transmitter today. So if you're going to get an alarm and alert, even if your phone were turned off, the way Eversense works is you get on-body vibratory motors, right? So there's a very obnoxious, heavy hypoglycemia alarm that you're not going to miss. There's a very strong hyperglycemic alarm, and they're different, so you'll recognize the signals. And that's if you didn't have the phone. Now, if you're on a plane, you've got your Bluetooth on. Yes, all of it's going to go right to the, right to the phone itself. And then as soon as you touch down and get back inside of cellular connectivity to the cloud, it's going to update it and push it all to the cloud. So it's all full function and capability.
Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes. I want to get into the future of Eversense a bit. So we have 1 year, but of course, how great would it be if we could have longer? Did you build this latest version in a way where you could anticipate this same build to last longer, or is your next endeavor set on creating that sensor that is powering itself and doesn't need a transmitter?
Yeah, so the answer is yes to both. I will say that as you know, in research and development, right, they really are two different phases. Research is the exploratory work, right? Coming up with the concepts. So the extension beyond a year is an R project, right? That we will continue to do work in our laboratories to try to extend. We're actually doing D work, so development, with the focused objective to actually bring that product to market right now with that transmitter elimination that we talked about. So we partnered with one of the world's largest supplier of implant-grade batteries. So they're made for medical device industry. They are doing a custom battery for us with their technology. It will make the sensor a little longer, but it's not any wider, right? So it'll continue to go in the same place in the back of your arm. It'll be inserted by the exact same procedure that we talked about, but it'll be self-powering. So that question that you asked before, you no longer need the transmitter because it's just gonna fire every 5 minutes and get a new glucose result, right? And where we think that's going to be really successful is perhaps in the people with type 2 diabetes that maybe don't need a nighttime alarm, right? Because they don't experience the hypoglycemia that the folks with type 1 diabetes have, or the prevalence of it, depending on where the therapy is, or if you're on a basal insulin, let's say. So what they're going to be able to do with the first generation product, which includes the battery, is essentially interrogate it with a swipe over the sensor, nothing on the skin, tap your phone like you might do with Apple Pay, Google Pay, and download up to 8 hours of your glucose profile overnight, right? So that's the Gemini product. It has the incorporated battery. And then the other one that we're talking about behind that we call Freedom, because Freedom is really the be-all, end-all. That also has the Bluetooth inside of it. So not only is it self-powering, you wouldn't do the swipe anymore, because then inside is the Bluetooth that's every 5 minutes sending your new glucose and rate arrow to the phone directly, right? Or to the other device, if you want it to a bedside display, or if you want it to a watch, right? All that comes when you have the incorporated Bluetooth technology. So those are in development, and we're committed to delivering those new generation products. We're going to continue to do the research, the R, for the longer and longer duration for sure.
You mentioned earlier about how this device can tell what is glucose and what's not. Are you researching other biomarkers that this sensor could one day look into? Lactate, ketones?
Ketones, exactly. So actually, the company was very early on actually founded to do oxygen measurement. So we actually can measure oxygen with it. As we've gone into diabetes, of course, the most important thing is glucose, but you're right. The next one up for us is ketones. And we've done the early work on ketones, and actually lactate is a little bit further along. So people that are looking for some healthy living, health style, those could also be incorporated as well. And that's one of the reasons that we put 16 photodiodes in there, is so that you could look all over the place spectrally to look at different analytes, be able to do multiple measurements. So it is, it's essentially, if you remember any high school chemistry, it's a little miniaturized fluorimeter, right? That's what we implant. And then we do the chemistry application to it to pick out the molecule you want to measure. So it is flexible. It can do a lot more. Glucose is by far the most important, but as you're learning with the rest of diabetes, doing more is going to help too.
When it comes to software, I know you said that there is room for improvement for the iPhone app. I believe there's an Apple Watch app. I'm not sure if there's any Android smartwatch, or probably a smartphone. Can you tell us about what is available software-wise and what that next step looks like to you?
Yeah, so certainly both the Android and iOS platforms are available. We do a lot of testing every time there's an update to make sure that we've got the medical device quality system compliance that we need to. In addition, you do have all of the external communications. We talked about a pump, right? Yes, to the Apple Watch as well. We are pretty close to actually releasing some of the Android Watch applications as well. So they're coming as well. But once you have it, like with the monitor that you were pointing to, the bedside display, that's the great flexibility that you want to have. And that's frankly the beauty is, people have pretty much standardized on Bluetooth. So they'll actually be there for sure as well. But base product in the US is iOS. Base product in Europe is the Androids, right? And they're all covered.
Great. Speaking of Europe, where else do you want to bring the CGM?
Yeah, Justin, as you can imagine, when you attend an EASD or an ATTD, you get a lot of requests from a variety of distributors and partners and physicians in different countries. When I joined Tandem, we were quite small and only had our pump in the United States. By the time I left Tandem, we had 25, 27 countries using our product. But the really only reason you scale is because you believe you can get to some volume and there's a need or a desire to acquire your product. And there's a partner to do it with, in countries like that if we don't have our own group. Although with Asencia, we have so many folks in so many countries around the world, it's very possible to do some of that on our own. So I think as we launch 365 and then start to have some of those conversations with success in our core markets we're in today, naturally there are several other large countries that don't have it right now, Benelux, the UK, France, right? You can go on and on of several other countries in Europe that we're not currently in. Those would be the natural fits. And then you start to get into some of the other areas. Our corporate headquarters of Asencia is the PHC group, and that's in Japan, where I was last week. It'd be really nice to have our product in Japan. It'd be nice to go down to Australia and New Zealand. So my eyes are big. We just need to, execute here in the US first, get it over to Europe in our existing countries, get it launched, and then start to look at other areas that might make sense for us.
Yeah, and with this 1 year marker that companies were telling you needed to have, or you in fact were telling Tim that he needed to have, and with iCGM designation, bringing in those pump companies, that will only bolster, this CGM and everyone's desire to have it. So I'm excited to see where it goes. Thank you two for coming on the show and teaching me so much and getting into where we've come so far and where we're going. I am very excited to see what's next, and I also would love to try it. I don't know if there's a way we can make that happen, but I think it'd be cool to put it in my arm and test it out. So we should talk about that.
Well, Justin, we appreciate it. I've been always wanting to try to insert one myself, so maybe you could be my practice dummy. I'm a little shaky with my hand, so I don't know if that's a good idea.
Oh, no.
Hey, listen, congrats on your continued success. It's kind of fun looking at some of your videos over the weekend as well and diving into some of the prior work you've done. Great stuff for the community. We much appreciate the access today, and keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, appreciate it. You're active on my Instagram feed, so appreciate it. And it's it's great to watch what's out there, especially from, a significant user like yourself, right? Because obviously you're very experienced. You know what you need. You know what other users like you need. So it does help us. We are honestly here, right? The only way we can survive is to provide products that excite you. So we're going to take that challenge and continue to move innovation forward. As you know, the last decade of diabetes management is just hyper accelerated because that's what we do. We stand on everybody else's shoulders to look forward. And we're in a rapid technological growth period. And the winner are people with diabetes, right? It's been, a pretty crappy disease, but we are making improvements as an industry. Until we get it eliminated, we're going to work to help.
Thank you so much. What do you think about the Eversense CGM and the upgrades that have come to this sensor? Would you trade in your current CGM for an implant that lasts a full year, but it still requires that outer transmitter? Or do you want to wait until there's an implant that doesn't need the outer transmitter to power it? How cool would that be? Having a small little thing in you does everything for you. If you've used Eversense before, I want to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments what you thought of it so far, and would you consider upgrading to this latest version? Thank you all for listening to this episode. I'm Justin, and I'll see you next week.